Our planet is a never-ending wonder. 1,000,000 years would barely suffice to see all the sights nature has curated, and it would take another billion to truly comprehend their machinations and ecosystems. So, in our human shackles, we can but watch and try to use our time to admire these gardens of life while we can. Today, we will look at one of the most active corners of our globe. The New World, the expanse only recently discovered through the efforts of the Hunters Guild. This massive continent and its surrounding islands have been the subject of much guild and research activity, and presents a perfect place to experience the splendor of our world. This is in no small part due to the staggering diversity of the wildlife. From endemic unicates to familiar faces, the New World is home to over 70 large monsters, all with their own place in the ecosystem. In this documentary film, we will pay each of them a visit, discovering the miraculous and fascinating ways in which they live in this biological paradise. While every single one of them could, and probably will, fill their very own documentary episode, this film will serve as an extensive overview of all the wonders the New World has to offer. The mysterious force known as bioenergy is a major factor of life in the New World. Through the flow of the subterranean Everstream, it is generated, distributed, and used all across the continent, where biomes spring up in accordance to its presence. While the southern third of the continent supports a great variety of life, it is quite isolated. An enormous wall of rock and stone called the Great Ravine encircles the center of the explored zone, creating a hard divide between the south and the north. While the walls of the ravine do also circle around to the north, its southern border is much more pronounced. Once the guild managed to penetrate the mountainous circle, the hunters were greeted with one of the most magnificent sights the New World has to offer: the Coral Highlands. This colorful cornucopia, alongside its gloomy counterpart, the Rotten Vale, sits on the central node of the Everstream, where all bioenergy must flow through on its journey across the continent. The result of this position is an unrivaled boom of life, entirely unmatched by almost any ecosystem on the planet. Coral organisms, originally native to the underwater caverns deep beneath the ravine, were, empowered by the Everstream and the enormous amount of necronutrients in the Vale, able to not only thrive on land, but to grow to enormous proportions. Young megacorals begin their growth at the bottom of the Vale, building up their gargantuan coral skeletons hundreds of meters into the air. However, as their size increases, so does their need for nutrients. But the higher they go, the less nutrients they have access to, eventually leading them to die after reaching a certain size. But once dead, corals this large don't just disappear. While their fleshy bodies rot away, their massive skeletons are hard as stone, remaining and forming the bedrock of the Coral Highlands. This process has, over the eons, produced a vast field of coral landscapes that now constitute their own ecosystem, suspended far above the Rotten Vale at the bottom of the ravine. The ancient coral skeletons are in fact so solid that smaller, younger species of corals can attach themselves to them and grow. These smaller species need fewer nutrients and can thus survive up high. The distribution also naturally separates the Coral Highlands into two distinct areas: the Coral Depths and the Cloudy Highlands. There are two dominant types of coral here. The tree coral forms structures similar to that of green forest trees, hence the name. They congregate mostly in the coral depths, huddling together to form a coral forest of sorts. Meanwhile, the massive plate corals can grow anywhere, but seem to prefer the highlands as their nesting spots. These disc-shaped organisms form the plateaus on the upper layers of the highlands. Both of these corals contribute to another unique feature of the highlands. The air is constantly filled with a fine white dust. While some of it is nutritional dust swept up from the rotten vale, the larger particles are coral eggs expelled by the organisms in the hopes of them growing into the very same type of megacorals. This aerosol dust, together with the fertile vale, form the basis of life within the highlands, which thrive and support multiple species both small and large. The elevational difference between the depths and the highlands doesn't just create a physical divide, but an ecological one as well. The highlands are patrolled and surveilled by the strongest monsters in the area, which pushes weaker species into the lower levels, creating a rigid and clear hierarchy. Thus, when exploring the coral depths, it is common to encounter the scavengers and small-time crooks of the ravine, specialized species that may not have the brawn to clash with the top wyverns, but nonetheless thrive within their own niche. Such is the case for the tsitsi yaku, a raptorial bird wyvern closely related to the kulu yaku, as the name suggests. Both of them are part of the ku clade, which also includes the primitive and widespread yan kutku. The tsitsi yaku was one of the first species the guild discovered in the highlands, and it immediately delivered a few surprises. For one, it is almost entirely passive towards humans. Its strong legs and long, sharp claws are actually mostly used for climbing across the various cliffs in the area, and while they can be deadly in combat, the tsitsi yaku is rather disinterested in using them if it isn't against their main source of food, the raffinos flying around the highlands. It is also not fond of conflict, having evolved a deep blue coloration that allows it to blend in among the corals. Humans can actually get shockingly close to the monster without triggering aggressive behavior, which has led the guild to mostly leave the creature alone, as it generally poses little to no threat. That does not, however, mean that the tsitsi yaku is a boring monster to observe, as it possesses the flashiest adaptation of the New World. Upon its initial discovery, the bird wyvern was commonly observed licking and ingesting a type of pink moss that grows on the walls of the corals, odd behavior for what seemed to be an exclusive carnivore. This unlikely snack turned out to be bright moss, a species of moss that grows almost anywhere on the new continent, but is particularly common in the Coral Highlands. This moss species is mostly known for its continuous bioluminescence, as its metabolism produces a light-emitting substance. This is also the case for some species of luminescent coral, which the monster also consumes. The tsitsi yaku feeds on these substances, not for nourishment, but as fuel for a very special ability. The bioluminescent agents from its diet are stored in two large, frilled antennae on the monster's head, where they lie dormant. Should the tsitsi yaku, however, feel threatened and need a quick escape, the frills open into two large panels lined with that bioluminescent substance that, when stimulated suddenly via an electric shock through the wyvern's nerves, detonates a blinding flash of light that will leave any opponent incapacitated for several seconds, temporarily burning their retinas. This gives the tsitsi yaku an opportunity for either an escape or a counterattack. This flash recharges fairly quickly, so the beast will use it generously. Beyond self-defense, however, this ability also helps at hunting. One flash, and the airborne raffinos rain down from the sky, their bruised and broken bodies too weak from the impact to resist the hungry tsitsi. Thanks to gravity, the tsitsi yaku's special weapon is extra effective against flying opponents, which is a necessary adaptation, as the Coral Highlands are full of flying creatures the tsitsi must be aware, and in some cases, wary of. The aforementioned raffinos are prey to basically everything in the highlands, and the slowly frying grandfather mantigrels fly so far up and have so little edible tissue that most beasts don't bother with them. One of the more prominent flying wyverns of the lower levels of the highlands, however, can be quite a handful. Gathering among the raffinos, the light-colored paulumu hovers across the corals, lazily feeding on the coral eggs that float around in the air. Similarly to the Tsitsiyaku, it is mostly a relaxed monster, more concerned with picking the eggs out of the air than any harsh competition, their primary objective being to feed among the corals and then return to their young in the cliff sides and grottos of the ravine. These fluffy wyverns are perfectly adapted to that lifestyle. Their soft white fur protects them from the cold air currents that whip about the sides and heights of the ravine, and their semi-prehensile, paddle-like tail allows them to ride said currents easily. However, that is not to say that the Paolumu is helpless in a pinch. Just like the Tsitsiyaku, it too has a defensive strategy: violence. While the Tsitsi relied on a single powerful move to escape danger, the Paolumu pummels any would-be adversary into submission using its strengths and immense aerial maneuverability. It does, however, also make use of one very special ability. Around its neck sits a flaccid pouch, usually nestled between the thick fur. This pouch is directly connected to the Paolumu's windpipe through a flap the monster can willingly open and close within its throat. When in need of additional mobility, the Paolumu can open that valve and gulp down air, which fills the pouch like a hot air balloon and allows the monster to hover freely above the ground. Once airborne, the Paolumu will relentlessly attack any threat it perceives, slamming its inflated body into the ground and using its tail like a club to clobber its enemies and defend its nesting areas. The pouch is stretchy and strong, and at its base lie a few specialized muscles which allow for the pouch to be contracted, forcing air out of it explosively. While its obvious use is to deflate the pouch once its usefulness is over, the Paolumu cleverly makes this feature work for itself in combat as well. The sudden contraction causes a jet of pressurized air to shoot into the Paolumu's throat, which it then can spit out at an opponent at a distance, knocking them over easily. In the Coral Highlands, it pays off to be that adaptive and clever. And adaptation is the key word whenever the topic of subspecies enters the picture. As offshoots of existing, more established species, subspecies develop in response to a new environment or a new ecological pressure within a population. A prime example of this would be the coral puke, a subspecies of puke only found in the Coral Highlands. How exactly a population of puke became native to the Coral Highlands isn't yet fully understood, but some within the guild speculate that at some point in the past, a mass exodus of the dominant monster of the Highlands left a power vacuum in the area, one that the adventurous puke, tired of being bullied in the ancient forest, was all too eager to fill. This group of puke would have then, over time, evolved into this coral subspecies, changing colors but retaining their function, to stand out and seem more dangerous than they really are. In the lush Coral Highlands, the puke no longer must scavenge for nuts and plants, but instead enjoys picking the coral eggs out of the air for nourishment, a much more relaxed experience. As long as it sticks to the shaded depths of the lower levels, it likely won't encounter any dangers anyway, and even if it did, it would be ready. With the change in diet came the loss of its poisonous spit, but the coral puke found a workaround. Along the lower levels grows a large blue species of coral called a sponge fan. These flat, disc-like structures are quite soft and mushy due to them storing humidity from rainfall and the air as water within their tissue. They thus provide vital watering holes for any species that can reach into their water pockets. The coral puke is one of those clients, but beyond just quenching its thirst, it can also turn that water into a fierce weapon. By gulping down great amounts of it, the coral puke can then use the muscles it still has from its poison-using ancestors to pressurize that water into highly destructive beams, which it can shoot out from either its mouth or its tail. Its proficiency with these beams is also quite a bit more sophisticated than anything the forest puke can do. While the forest species throws out imprecise poison clouds from its tail, the coral species can spin and zip around its tail to create deadly water wheels. And the large tongue now has a secondary purpose, as by positioning it in various ways, the puke can change the direction and property of its mouthbeam without moving its head, which can make for a nasty surprise for any would-be attacker. So while its origins may still be mysterious, the results of the coral puke's lifestyle change are clear to see. However, While this is an example of very new, rather unknown subspecies, the Coral Highlands house another subspecies that is much older and much more feared. If asked what the most successful species of monster known to man would look like, most guild researchers would no doubt point at the rafts. These flying wyverns cover extensive habitats all across the planet, and are able to multiply astoundingly quickly for such a large and complex species. It has been suggested that this fast reproduction is tied to the enormous ecological efficacy of the rafts, their clear sexual dimorphism allowing them to efficiently fulfill mating and parental duties much more consistently than other species. This high fertility, however, comes with a catch. The faster a species runs through the generations, the more mutations accumulate, as any one birth has a random chance of one or multiple random mutations. So if many births happen continually, the species begins exhibiting a multitude of mutations that may or may not stick around. A notable example would be the Azure Rathalos, which emerged from a mutation wherein the beast's shell became so thick that it had to become stronger in order to still fly. In fact, many subspecies are born out from an initially detrimental mutation that the monster surpasses through adaptation. This is also the case for the Coral Highlands royal predator, the pink Rathian. This subspecies is well known in the old world for its heightened aggression, and its new world population certainly lives up to that moniker. As an originally forest-dwelling species, a Rathian born with a mutated pink pigmentation is by all intents meant to die. Sticking out like a signal fire, it can neither hunt nor flee, and yet, from this death sentence, the pink Rathian emerged, a subspecies that countered the worsening ecological pressure with pure fury and wrath, essentially becoming as powerful as a regular Rathalos. It achieves this through a few key adaptations. The continuous fight for survival enhances the pink Rathian's muscle mass, and the many assaults its tail suffers during youth cause the shelling on it to grow tougher beyond even the hardest spots of a Rathalos. Additionally, its proficiency with poison has also increased, being able to administer higher and stronger doses of its venom. The result is a pink Rathian which fights harder and more ferociously than any of its green cousins, and its permanent residence among the upper levels of the Highlands makes them a common and fierce sight. This is an example of a species making a detrimental mutation work for itself through sheer violence and aggression, something that not many species can do, but when it works, it really works. The pink Rathian can often be observed rushing around in a crazed frenzy, attempting to kill anything they can before they are spotted due to their bright pigmentation. However, aggressive as it may be, the pink Rathian does not go unopposed, as it has a rival that challenges it for the spot of apex predator in the Coral Highlands. And what a challenge it is! For no one can trespass into the Highlands without eventually being faced with the Legiana. This massive flying wyvern differentiates itself from the others in its genus through a few key specialties. For one, the Legiana uses a completely different method of flight than other wyverns. While monsters like the Wraths use bird-like movements to force themselves into the air, a Legiana flies by using the many segments on its wings to latch onto air currents, riding them at almost no energy cost and thus having little to no need to flap its wings outside of takeoff. This method has its own pros and cons. Because of the hyper-specific conditions required, the Legiana can only really fly in areas that have the right kind of air currents, like the Coral Highlands or the Hinterland Sea, limiting their habitats greatly. However, within those habitats, their aerial mobility is entirely unmatched, as the low energy cost and immense speed of the glider flight makes the Legiana the uncontested ruler of the skies above the Highlands. However, that rule isn't continuous, as another special aspect of the Legiana is that they are migratory. for the most part, Legiana spend all of their time in the Coral Highlands, hunting and eating and just living. However, as they become more mature, the Legiana will migrate across the Hinterland Sea towards the Hinterlands, an icy peninsula on the far west of the New World. Here, in the Hoarfrost Reach, the Legiana will mate and nest, before returning to the Coral Highlands once again. Some individual, stronger Legiana may however stay behind to protect the frozen nesting grounds during the absence of its brethren. Once back in the Highlands, the Legiana continues its reign by rushing down its prey relentlessly, both through its incredible speed and its secret weapon. Across its entire body, particularly its underside, the beast is covered in so-called secretory glands, which are little holes in its skin that directly connect to the Legiana's frost sac, an internal organ that produces a freezing liquid. When needed, the Legiana stimulates that sac, which starts pumping that liquid into the various secretory glands, which then secrete the liquid as tiny drops that hang off the monster's underside. This liquid quickly begins forming ice crystals when exposed to air. This gives the Legiana a powerful weapon, as it can now use its wings to blow the ice crystals into a blizzard-like wind directed towards its prey. Fighting a speeding wyvern is excruciatingly difficult on a good day. Doing so while ice stalls your movements is nigh on impossible. This combination of ice and speed has made the Legiana one of the most successful hunters of the New World, its power only really hampered by its limited habitat. However, this technique isn't perfect. Each secretory gland is, essentially, an opening directly into the monster's body, meaning that the Legiana is highly susceptible to infections, illness, and toxins. Worse still, once it is sick, the Legiana's own immune response produces a mucus which clogs those glands, which results in the Legiana being unable to use its ice attacks when, for example, poisoned. This, of course, makes its stalemate with the Pink Rathian that much more precarious, as that wyvern's spiky tail is more than capable of delivering such toxins. However, the ice-cold winds of the Legiana and unmatched speed of its blows still give the Pink Rathian a run for it, making this competition for dominance fierce and hard-fought. But even the various turf wars of the Highlands are naught but noise to the true emperors of any ecosystem, the Elder Dragons. Mystical and dangerous, very little is generally known about any of the monsters in this wide genus. The New World, however, presented the guild with a golden opportunity, as the Elder Crossing regularly causes high amounts of Elder Dragon activity in the continent. Activity that could be vital for observation. And while this chance has yielded plentiful results for some Elder Dragons, others remain yet shrouded in mystery, eluding explanation and defying classification. One such example is the thunderous steed of the Old World, seated now in the Coral Highlands, the mighty Kirin. As one of the first Elder Dragons to ever be discovered by the guild, one would think that there would be more known about it. And yet, this beast remains an almost complete mystery. They seem to appear in almost any habitat, but prefer elevated areas where they can trot about undisturbed. Kirin seem to be mostly tame, not paying much mind to whatever happens around them. Should one become hostile, however, it displays one of the most logic-defying abilities ever recorded. Through a movement of its horn, the Kirin can call forth lightning strikes from the sky at any time, seemingly with little to no effort. Beyond this, the monster also constantly charges up electricity in its mane, which it can release as bolts or use to shroud itself in a thunderous aura which hardens its skin beyond what conventional weapons can pierce. None of these abilities have ever been explained sufficiently by any hunter, researcher, or scientist, as they go against everything we know about physics and even against the thunder trade-off hypothesis. A few key observations about these powers have however been able to be made. For one, the Kirin's Thunder ability grows and matures with age, as older Kirin, those with larger manes, are visibly more proficient at using it. This leads to the hypothesis that the mane might be crucial in the beast's control over thunder. That is only half the truth, however, as a maybe more crucial organ for that ability may be the horn. It glows whenever the Kirin uses its thunder ability, and should it get broken, it becomes clearly weakened. But even with a broken horn, the Kirin's thunder remains usable, albeit decreased in strength, meaning that the ability likely comes from an interplay between horn and mane. How exactly it works, no one knows. Up until recently, it was even unknown what the Kirin ate, until one hunter, by complete chance, stumbled onto a Kirin munching on some of the plants in the Upper Highlands. By all intents and purposes, the Kirin remains a complete and utter mystery. While the Kirin presents a riddle from the old world, the new world offers its own enigmatic creatures for the guild to puzzle about. The unique ecosystem of the Coral Highlands is defined by an abundance of nutrients, high humidity, and multiple points of skybound elevation. Thus, given the average age and success of elder dragons, it stands to reason that at some point, the Highlands would have produced an elder dragon that is hyper-adapted to these specific factors, a super being born to take advantage of all of these aspects. This hypothesis became reality when the guild discovered the ancient abyss dragon, the Namiel. A distant relative of the old world Chameleos, this elder dragon distinguishes itself through its unusual body shape. The large wings resemble the flaps of a manta ray and can fly without having to exert any movement, while the body is more reminiscent of aquatic reptiles, with the face in turn inheriting features from deep-sea fish such as the angler. But this body isn't just oddly shaped, it also behaves oddly. While it is normally of a milky pale color, the Namiel can turn on an orchestra of bioluminescent nodes on its body to completely transform its appearance, becoming shrouded in bright reds, oranges, and deep blues. It can also alternate the colors of those nodes to create patterns, both for communication and for confusing prey. But even that is not the Namiel's primary oddity. Within its body, the Namiel produces something that the guild has come to calling water slime, a light mucus that mimics the properties of water, but that dries out much slower and is much more slippery and conductive. This water slime has a multitude of purposes. For one, it is what actually stimulates the luminescent nodes within the beast, so if a Namiel runs out of water slime, it will revert back to its milky pale state. More importantly, however, this makes the colored state a warning, because if the Namiel does have slime to spare, it will use it as a deadly weapon. By spraying it out of its mouth, the Namiel can not only launch the slime to ensnare prey, but also to control the battlefield, as its slippery texture creates areas of danger for its opponent. By strategically placing puddles of slime around the area, the monster forces the enemy to stand within the slime, which is when it truly begins its assault. Thanks to its enormous wingspan, the Namiel can flap its wings into the water to create short-lived but strong currents, which weaken the footing of its prey. Once the target is thoroughly disoriented and trapped, the Namiel moves in for the kill. On the tip of its tendrils that emerge from its wings, the beast has tiny organs which can produce electricity, similar to that of eels. These tips can be used to touch the slime, causing a chain reaction wherein the electricity is conducted across large distances and into the enemy. By controlling the voltage, the Namiel can alternate between lightly zapping a few puddles and vaporizing entire wetlands. In moments of crisis, it can even resort to a more extreme version, where it quickly floods the entire nearby area with its entire water slime arsenal before crashing down with its tips charged at the maximum voltage. This resulting thunder explosion reaches incredibly far and is almost impossible to survive, but it isn't something the monster can do often, as it loses its entire stock of slime at once, which needs time to refill and leaves the Namiel vulnerable. Lucky for the beast, however, and for the other inhabitants of the Highlands, it doesn't need to use this maneuver very much, as the Namiel is generally docile and uninterested in conflict until provoked, and like most Elder Dragons, other creatures are generally also uninterested in provoking it. A land of plenty, it may seem, and yet the Coral Highlands unfold their own unique sets of drama and conflict. Even in the face of bountiful life, nature encourages competition in various, fascinating ways. Be it the flight of the Legiana, the thunderclap of the Kirin, or the watery abyss of the Namiel, there are no limits to the wonders of our world.